Antarctica is supposed to be empty. No cities, no graves, no history, no humans. But in 1985, a Chilean scientist crouching on a remote Antarctic beach pulled something from the rocky sand that should not have been there. Part of a human skull. Stained green from algae, worn by decades of exposure, but unmistakably human. And when researchers dated the remains, the answer stopped everyone cold. The woman had died before Antarctica was officially discovered. That is not a mystery at the edges. That is a contradiction at the center of everything we thought we knew about the last unexplored frontier on Earth. For millions of years, Antarctica was isolated from the rest of the world by the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, one of the most powerful ocean systems on the planet. During the age of the dinosaurs, it had been a different place entirely. A verdant landscape of ferns and rivers and ancient forests, home to early amphibians and the ancestors of modern marsupials. But by the time humanity began spreading across the globe, that world was long gone. What remained was ice, interior temperatures dropping to minus 60 degrees Celsius. Winds that made sustained human presence not just difficult, but essentially impossible. No indigenous population had ever lived there. No civilization had ever reached it. Sailors told stories of a great southern landmass, Terra Australis Incognita, theorized to balance the weight of the northern continents. But those were stories. The first confirmed visual sighting of Antarctica's coastline did not occur until 1820, when Russian explorer Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen, aboard the Vostok, recorded observing an ice shore of extreme height rising from the Southern Ocean. American and British expeditions followed shortly after, and the age of Antarctic exploration formally began, which makes what happened on the 7th of January 1985 all the more impossible to explain. Chilean scientist Daniel Torres Navarro was working on a remote section of coastline called Yamana Beach, near Cape Shirreff on Livingston Island in the Antarctic Peninsula. He was collecting marine debris, routine survey work in one of the most isolated places on Earth. At 4:35 in the afternoon, he uncovered the parieto-occipital portion of a human skull, the rear and upper section of the cranium, protruding from the rocky sand, green with algae, worn by the elements, but preserved well enough to study. Over subsequent years, additional fragments emerged from the same area. A maxilla with intact teeth, though the central incisors were absent. Femur fragments recovered in 1988 and 1993. Piece by piece, a partial skeleton was assembling itself from the Antarctic shoreline. Initial examination delivered the first surprise. The skull belonged to a young woman. Her dental structure, bone composition, and cranial characteristics pointed towards South American. Origin, most likely Chilean. Torres described her in his subsequent analysis as mestiza, a term indicating mixed ancestry, probably descended from both indigenous and European lineages. Radiocarbon dating then delivered the finding that reframed everything. The remains dated to between 1819 and 1825, years that sit at the very threshold of Antarctica's official discovery. And, in the earliest cases, before it. A young South American woman, dead on an Antarctic beach, before the continent was formally known to exist. No ship's log has ever been found connecting her to a documented voyage. No personal belongings, no artifacts, no historical record of any kind that places a woman of her description anywhere near this coastline during those years. The site was excavated carefully, a 3-by-3-meter trench sunk to 80 centimeters, all soil meticulously sifted. Nothing further was recovered. Whatever story brought her here left no paper trail in any archive that researchers have been able to locate in the decades since. The theories that exist are plausible but unconfirmed. Torres himself suggested she may have been connected to a 19th century sealing expedition. European demand for seal fur and oil was driving crews into increasingly remote and dangerous southern waters during exactly this period. She may have been a worker, a stowaway, or an indigenous Yagan or Mapuche individual accompanying South American or European sealers into waters that no chart accurately described. She may have fallen ill. She may have been abandoned, a practice that the brutality of those expeditions makes historically credible. Alternatively, she may have died at sea and been committed to the ocean in the standard manner of the time. her body carried by currents and storms to the Antarctic shore, where it eventually came to rest on Yamana Beach. What science has not yet been able to add to any of these theories is genetic confirmation. In the years following the discovery, researchers expressed clear intention to use DNA analysis to determine whether the femur fragments recovered later belonged to the same individual as the original skull, and to establish her ancestry with genomic precision. Ancient DNA technology has advanced dramatically since the 1990s, and cold environments are generally among the better conditions for biological preservation. But Antarctica presented a complication that cold alone could not solve. The bones had likely been exposed to marine submersion and coastal erosion over decades before discovery. Saltwater immersion is known to degrade DNA severely, attacking the molecular bonds that make genetic recovery possible. To date, no published study has confirmed that successful DNA analysis was completed. The intention existed, the technology now exists. Whether the degradation was simply too extensive, or whether the analysis remains unpublished for other reasons, the woman's genetic identity has not been confirmed. She remains unidentified in every meaningful sense. Her skull is currently preserved in the scientific collection of the Instituto Antartico Chileno in Santiago. Only one archival photograph of the restored cranium has ever been published, appearing in a 1999 journal article that reached almost no general audience. The absence of wider documentation is not negligence. It reflects the strict environmental and ethical protocols governing Antarctic research. But it means that one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries of the 20th century is almost entirely unknown outside a small circle of specialists. Antarctica is melting. The accelerating loss of ice across the continent is exposing rock, sediment, and shoreline that has been locked under frozen layers for centuries. What else is buried there? What other traces of the people who pushed into these waters before the maps caught up with them remains unknown. Thus, an intersection of ancient DNA technology and a thawing continent is going to produce discoveries that nobody has yet predicted. But the woman on Yamana Beach is still waiting for the most basic answer. Not where she came from, in the broad geographical sense. That much can be inferred, but who she was, what her name was, what brought her to the most remote coastline on Earth in the years before anyone officially knew it existed. The skull is in Santiago. The DNA may be unrecoverable. And the story of how a young woman ended up dead on an Antarctic beach before Antarctica was discovered remains for now exactly what it has always been, unanswered.